All over the world, observers have been impressed then by the amount and type of aggression released in individuals and nations, and by the impact of this aggression on those children and adults who were the victims of it. It is only natural that practical experiences of this kind lead to the wish for a better theoretical understanding of the happening. On the other hand, the recent war has taught us nothing about aggression which might not have been learned before. The role played by aggression in human relations was open to view in all periods of history, in the wars between nations, the civil wars, the battles between races, the oppression or extermination of minorities, the religious persecutions, and the crimes of violence committed by individuals. Additional material for the observation of aggressive behavior has besides at all times been provided by children. Young children throughout the ages have shown trends of violence, aggression, and destructiveness. If anything, the parents and educators of the past were more impressed by this aspect of the child's nature than we are today. Many methods of upbringing, which are luckily outdated now, were so grimly severe, since they were designed to check what people thought of as the badness of their children, their violence, their tendencies to harm, to hurt, and to destroy. What has changed in the field of aggression is therefore not the range of the phenomena which are under observation, but the attitude of those who are observing them. Formerly, psychologists used to look away from the cruder and more displeasing manifestations of human nature, to deny their occurrence, or to belittle their importance, especially where children were concerned. Today, the opposite tendency is very much in evidence. Such forms of behavior are scrutinized, they are described, they are assessed as to their importance, and they are traced back to their starting points in early life. It seems to me a legitimate claim that this change of attitude is due to the work of psychoanalysis, which began at the end of the last century. Psychoanalytic findings have brought about a complete reorientation with regard to the role of the instinctive drives for the whole development of the individual. In times before psychoanalysis, childhood was regarded as a period of more or less peaceful, progressive growth. The instinctive urges, where they appeared, merely playing the part of disturbers of the peace. In contrast to this view, we ascribe now to these same urges the main role in shaping the mind and forming the character. Instinctive wishes arise from the body and make themselves felt in the mind as urgent claims for satisfaction. The wish may be for food, warmth, and comfort. It may be a sexual desire, or it may be an aggressive move. Whatever it is, the child will feel unbearable, painful pressure so long as the wish remains unfulfilled. And he will feel pleasurable relief and relaxation when the aim is reached and the wish gratified. The younger the infant, the more he suffers from the pain of unfulfilled desires, and the more he longs for the pleasure of fulfilled wishes. He develops gradually a whole range of functions which equip him for this struggle for wish fulfillment. He learns to realize what goes on in his own inside, such as hunger or a longing for his mother. He begins to make out the people and happenings in his environment and to assess whether they will gratify or will frustrate his wishes. He stores up pleasurable and painful experiences in his mind and thereby develops what we call memory. He learns to use his limbs purposefully in the service of his desires. He acquires speech and with it the ability to communicate his wishes to the environment. During all this time, the constant pressure from the drives acts as a stimulus towards increasingly higher development of mental life. Far from disturbing the growth of the personality, the instinctive drives serve as mind builders. It would be a mistake to think that psychoanalytic study of the drives began on aggression. For more than 30 years, analytic investigators were almost exclusively occupied with probing into the manifestations of sexuality. The result of that work is by now well known. Its most revolutionary aspect concerned the discovery that sex life does not begin at puberty but at birth, and that before reaching its adult form, it passes through a series of stages in which sexual excitation arises from various parts of the body, other than the genital parts. This meant, in other words, that it is normal for children to have sex activities, and more than that it is normal for these sex activities to have their own peculiarly crude and primitive character. It took considerable time and a persistent struggle before these findings were taken as valid for child psychology. In fact, the battle for a new, dynamic type of child psychology was largely fought out over this question of infantile sexuality. It needed an overwhelming mass of clinical evidence collected by analysts over the years before a number of parents, doctors, and scientists finally accepted the new views. When it happened, the way was paved for further understanding of the child's instinctive urges. The investigators of infantile sexuality had been the first to destroy the age-old belief in the so-called innocence of childhood. Therefore, they had had to bear the brunt of the disbelief and indignation of the public. After them, the investigators of infantile aggression found a willing audience and have today comparatively easy play. As it is, we assume today that there are two groups of instinctive urges which have equal status: sex and aggression, each of them representing the action of a main biological force which underlies human life. Sex is thought of as the representative of the life force, aggression as representing the destructive force. But neither sex nor aggression appear normally in a pure form. The two fundamental drives combine forces with each other or act against each other, and they produce the phenomena of life not singly, but through those interactions. For instance, it can be shown that the development of aggression is inseparably bound up with the development of infantile sexuality. On each level of sex development, the aggressive urges manifest themselves in different ways, lending force to the expressions of the child's love life. To say it in simpler words, Infantile sexuality provides the wishes and longings for the mother's milk, for her presence, for possession of her as a person, for her attention and admiration, for knowledge of the facts of life, and so on. But it is the aggressive force which enables the child to assert his rights to the possession of his loved people, to compete with his rivals, to satisfy his curiosities, to display his body or his abilities, even to grab possession of his food and destroy it by eating it. Where aggression does not come to the help of sex in this manner, as happens in abnormal cases, infantile sexuality becomes ineffective. Such children show little pleasure in eating. They have weak emotional attachments. They are inhibited in their curiosity, in their intellectual achievements, and even in their play. Where conversely sex does not come to the help of the aggressive urges, aggression finds expression in pure destruction or self-destruction, and becomes in this form unmanageable and uncontrollable. On the other hand, this fusion between sex and aggression, beneficial as it is at the same time responsible for the fact that the love relationships of human beings are so commonly disturbed and interfered with by emotions of a hostile nature. Sex and aggression, that means love and hate, are intermixed by nature and from the beginning of life. Both opposing tendencies directed towards the same persons. This implies that the infant develops towards his mother hostile as well as loving feelings. That he is not only angry with the mother when she has to deny him the fulfillment of his wishes, but also spontaneously and without such provocation. The tendency to turn negative and aggressive feelings towards loved people then persists throughout life and inevitably carries distress and bewilderment into otherwise happy and positive adult love relationships. All human beings suffer from this inability to establish purely positive relations with their fellow beings, and many people long all their lives for the experience of pure love, unmixed with hostility and aggression. A feeling which belongs evidently not to the sphere of reality at all, but to the sphere of fantasies, daydreams, utopias, and other poetic productions. Individuals who allow free expression to their aggressive urges become a menace to their fellow beings and create large-scale suffering, as the events of the last war have amply demonstrated. On the other hand, it is important to remember that a nearly equal measure of suffering is created by the ways and means which human beings adopt in their attempts to control and transform their aggressive strivings. In the development of every child, there comes a time when his aggressive tendencies begin to conflict with other tendencies or attitudes which are inherent in his personality. The child suddenly cannot bear to hate the parents whom he loves. He will cease to love him because of his bad thoughts. He begins then to dread his own aggressive ideas, fantasies, and wishes, reacts to them with outbursts of anxiety and guilt, and tries to banish them from his mind. There are various ways in which a child can go about this task, each way bringing with it its own specific dangers and disadvantages, as the following examples show. Children are horrified to realize that they harbor death wishes against father or mother. They may repress these wishes, with the result that they are no longer bothered by them in their conscious mind, while so far as the unconscious is concerned, the hostile feelings continue to exist. Fearing that the repressed hostile tendencies might re-emerge from the unconscious, the child may next begin to overemphasize his positive, loving feelings and develop an excessive gentleness of behavior, a horror of violence, or an over-solicitude concerning the parent's health and safety. He may even go so far as to deny himself all aggressive expression, which, as described before, will have a crippling effect on his love life and his vital interests. Such children succeed actually in eliminating all hostility against the parents from their minds, but they pay for it with severe inhibitions and with neurotic symptoms. Another possible outcome. Instead of being repressed altogether, the child's aggressive tendencies may merely become directed away from the parents themselves and displaced onto people who are less vitally important for the child. He can then continue to love father and mother without the interference of hostile tendencies, but instead he will become negative, critical, and unfriendly towards persons outside the family, such as servants, casual acquaintances, strangers, foreigners. Or, another possibility, the child may cease to feel that his aggressive tendencies are part of himself, and instead ascribe them, project them, as it is called, to people in his environment, usually the same people against whom his original hostility has been directed. The child then feels innocent of aggressive intentions himself, but believes that the people outside are attacking and persecuting him, and he becomes intensely and painfully afraid of them. Projection of aggression and displacement of aggression are responsible for most of the strain, suspiciousness, and intolerance which exist in the relations between human beings. A further, equally important way of controlling the use of aggression against the parents is the turning inward of it, against the child's own self. Where a child uses this escape from aggressiveness too extensively, the consequences may be very striking. Such children become gentle towards the environment, but they begin to belittle and dislike themselves, their own looks, or their own achievements. That means they lose confidence in themselves. They develop excessive self-criticism, guilt feelings, and depressions. In the bodily sphere, such self-destructive attitudes may result in frequent accidents or in an increased tendency to develop organic illness, so-called psychosomatic illness. So far as the development of their aggression is concerned, children are placed between two dangers. They may live out their aggressive tendencies too freely and thereby become a threat to their environment. Or they may restrict them too severely and thereby turn themselves into inhibited, tortured, or suspicious beings. From the point of view of social adaptation and mental health, both outcomes are equally unsatisfactory. Parents have always sensed these dangers and consider dealing with the child's aggression one of their main tasks. The parents of old, who did not realize that aggressiveness is the inevitable manifestation of an inborn drive, reacted to this behavior of the child with counter-aggression of their own, in the form of punishment and criticism. This only increased the child's hostility as well as his inner conflict and made matters worse. Modern and more enlightened parents try to show an extreme permissiveness towards the child's aggressive actions, usually with disappointing results too, since the child is then left to battle alone with his hostile wishes and fantasies, of which he feels afraid. So far, the best results have been achieved by those educators and parents who do not deal directly with the child's aggressiveness at all. Instead, they direct their attention to the child's emotional development and try to give him the possibility of stable, secure, and satisfying relationships. Where this succeeds, aggression will come under the beneficial, mitigating influence of the child's love life, and instead of reaping destruction, will serve the constructive, positive purposes of life.